What's up, squad? This is Brandon from the Bantu Sun. Thank you so much for joining me today. I wanted to hop on and talk about a recent interview I saw with Steve Bannon. So, for those that know, Steve Bannon is a former Trump campaign manager. He's really considered one of the intellectual leaders of the populist movement or the nationalist popular movement, as they would say. He's also has the podcast, The War Room, which is one of the top communication methods on that populist movement side. And he did an interview with GB News. And the reason why I really appreciate Steve Bannon interviews is because he's a intellectual, so to speak. He's a person that really grounds his ideas around logic, grounded logic, in philosophy and history. He cites precedents, and so he's a person that he basically asserts his belief from a very philosophical point of view. Like, he wins people with ideas, and that's saying a lot because he's a person that can articulate what someone would say is a hodgepodge. See, President Trump is not like this. Donald Trump is actually a pragmatist, and he takes what he thinks will be the most advantageous and he tries to work his way through that. This is why he's a person that many say can be appealed through vanity. He's a person that, if he likes you, he'll praise you positively. If you say something he doesn't like about himself or you're critical of him, he'll talk about you in disparaging terms. It's because he's a very tick for tack person, President Trump. Whereas Bannon is more of this ideological, grounded roots point of view. He's going to believe these thoughts in 5 years, 10 years, whether it's in his favor or against his favor. And it's really great because he's quite aligned with President Trump, despite their strategic differences. And he really is able to articulate the vision that President Trump is trying to implement. And because of that, it really makes the target of where they're trying to go, as Wayne Gretzky would say, go to the puck, is that it really paints the target of where they want to put the target, at least from this wing. I think President Trump is an amalgamation, his support is an amalgamation of three groups primarily. One group is going to be the Zionists. I think he's very popular in that group. This is a person that talks about setting up resorts in the Gaza Strip. So he's a person I think the Zionists really support. They trust. He's very pro Israel. Through his relationship, he's a person that has basically came out in full force of that, and I think he gets the support as well from that side of the aisle. So that's one group. So people that believe in a Judeo-Christian roots, people that believe in a strong Israel, as the former saying goes, the cop on the beat, Israel representing is a Western outpost in the Middle East, protecting interests and basically being considered as an outpost of, you can say, peace and stability, because what they would say is, due to their economic development, Israel would say they're supporting peace and stability. But of course, if you're on the other side of the aisle, as you just saw with so much of the leveling of the Gaza Strip, some people would definitely say you cannot put Israel and peace in the same sentence. So you have that one group right there. Another group you have are these tech elites, right? Now, the tech elites, I think these are people who are a lot more prevalent in the second term than the first term. I think they saw the groundswell for President Trump, saw it as inevitable, and they saw he was pragmatic and they got on board. Of course, one of the great forerunners of this is Elon Musk. Nobody would, because Elon Musk is a globalist, he's a geneticist, he's a Darwinist. This is not a person that believes in national populism. Elon Musk, I think he wants the best and the brightest doing to seize opportunities. I don't think he cares about who does the job. What he cares about is the job being done well. So he's not trying to hold jobs for American citizens. And so this is an example of this tech elite that is coming around. And even in Steve Bannon says as well, he talks about these groups such as Facebook, Google, Tesla, they do these monopolies, and now you have AI coming on board and things of that nature. So you see this new class of elite future industries, but President Trump has got some of that support. But as I said, primarily this economic elite, the tip of the spear being Elon Musk. And then you have the bulk, or the voters, the people that's really putting their feet on the ground in this nationalist populist movement. Now, as I said, because I think President Trump isn't necessarily an ideologue, this is why he's able to have such a disparate group. And of course, this national populist movement, which more or less you can definitely say National Socialism is their way of thinking, but I'll go even deeper to an American roots. I think these guys are just basically Jacksonian Democrats, from the way Bannon talks, from the ideas he proposes, and their philosophy on how they move things. These really put me in the mindset of the Jacksonian Democrats of the early up to mid 19th century. And so, listening to Steve Bannon, and of course, he just goes off the gamut. And I was able to catch some inconsistencies in his point of view that I thought was interesting, because you can tell he's really representing this. Like I say, he's an ideologue. So this is a person that has no problem proposing President Trump has a third term in office. And that's one of the things that I always question is, where's President Trump's succession plan? And it seems as though he doesn't have one. And I find it to be very interesting. Unlike Andrew Jackson, you don't find these trumpets or these Trump ideologues following suit. You don't see this new form of politician. You see Republicans taking advantage of opportunities. Nobody believes that Marco Rubio or J.D. Vance, VP Vance, is thoroughly in support of Trump policies. They've been critics of him in the past, but these are opportunists. They took advantage of an opportunity, and they're fulfilling their job to the best of their abilities. But no means do I believe they walk in lockstep and barrel with President Trump. So you have these groups, and Bannon proposes things such as talking about third Trump. I've heard him talk about a third Trump term, but in this interview in specific, he says some very, very strong words. He called Europe deadbeats. He talks about the Russian army is Europe's problem. The Russian Navy is America's problem. He speaks about, which I understand, a hemispheric defense, even though I think it's flawed logic, the hemispheric defense strategy about securing Greenland and Panama, etc. As I said, this goes back to, I think, a regressive way of thought. America has been able to defend its interests without the bad blood of pretty much annexing its neighbors relatively well since post World War II. And the way they have done this is through alliances, not by bullying Denmark, but align with Denmark. Now, you can say Europe hasn't carried their weight, but there are plenty of levers that America could have used to ensure that Denmark pulls its weight. But nevertheless, he talks about basically making Europe as a buffer between America and Russia, and as an apathetic buffer at that. It seems as though he has really no interest in defending Europe, which I find very interesting, because he had a lot of interest in defending Asia. He talks about Diego Garcia and the Chagos Island in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and he talks about how strategically pivotal this is. And although it's not a lot of land in the Indian Ocean, if you're relying on Diego Garcia in that part of the world to carry out your defense interests, you're in bigger trouble. There are so many better options and better relationships one can carry out. But what that island does do is get you a spot within the Indian Ocean where you can carry out forces or your plans autonomously. But he talks about how strategic that is, but yet he wantonly says, Europe, you're on your own. Even though the core of America, he calls America a Pacific nation. America's not a Pacific nation. Historically, America is rooted on the Atlantic coast. And he even admits, America has the intellectual, the accredited class is in that Bosch-Wash corridor, the roots of America, despite California being the wealthiest states. That Bosch-Wash corridor between Boston and Washington, D.C., this is still historically the roots of the American political, economic, and cultural roots. So he basically says, well, America, I understand why they do that. It's because they have this, I don't want to say xenophobia, but they definitely don't see Asians the same as Westerners. And these are a form of Western supremacists. And I always find this interesting because although they exude this Western supremacist idea where he talks about Christian Judeo roots, they are constantly in the fear of Asia, which I find to be interesting because if you're a supreme, how can you have a threat? But that's neither here nor there. So I found some of this logic was flawed, but basically the fundamentals are he stated very much well, and it really reminds me of the changing of the guard now with China. China has just proven Trump tried to shove these tariffs down everybody's throat, and then it was like, wait, hold up, we can't just do that. China stood up and they challenged those tariffs. And although I think America had an opportunity, or they could have played this way better, I think maybe because Trump only has 4 more years, or perceived to have 4 more years, he's really trying to cram too much in at the same time. He probably could have did more bilateral negotiations. And I think they was really trying to stuff 10 pounds of crap in a 1 pound bag. But what did you see? You saw China not bow down to the tariffs, and then Trump has rescinded many of those tariffs. So you see this change of the guard. You see this rise of China. And the fundamental problem is America's trying to cover up. As they say, Doge, Department of Government Efficiency, of Elon Musk, they've done covered all of this corruption supposedly, but there's been basically no arrest, and that's saying something. America has benefited greatly from its relationship from China, regardless of what President Trump says from the campaign trail about how we're being robbed. America has benefited greatly. This is why America's still on the forefront. I just saw in Texas they just brought back a 10,000-year-old extinct animal. Technologically, economically, America has benefited greatly. The problem is a lot of that wealth has been wasted, and some people will say, I was just listening to Jack Ma the other day. Some people will say it's endless war. Some people will say it's basically brokering or subsidizing the global order. Many people will say, this might be wasted, but America has benefited. There's states such as Mississippi is on par with on a GDP per capita. Mississippi, which is on a one would consider the lower tenth of American economic machines, or the lower tenth of American economic drivers from a state point of view. Like Mississippi is on par with major countries in Europe. You can put Mississippi up against the Czech Republic or whatnot. So Europe has really stagnated, and a lot of that is because of the welfare state, many will say, and bad demographics. So, but America, on the other hand, America has still held its stride. And you just can't help it that a country such as China, with 4 times the population and just as much hustle, bustle, creativity, drive, and innovation, you can't help it that a country that is a 4-to-1 ratio rises to be appear and even may surpass you just because of numbers alone. What only kept them down was their economic regression. As they gain economically, of course they're going to be your peers and maybe even surpass you by the numbers alone. And China has a lot of things, and China is really coming along in a different way. This isn't like the West. When a country in the West came up, a lot of times it was done militarily. I think China has practiced a great amount of restraint, but I also think China is very limited in many of the things they can do. I don't think they're as big as bad a wolf as they're painted out to be. I think they make a lot of great strides, but I also think they do have a lot of challenges. And the Chinese do need the global world order. They're not like America, where they're just this bevy of natural resources that can feed their machines and drive their consumption. China needs to be the world's workshop. That's their shtick. That's one trick pony. It's a hell of a trick, but it's a hell of a trick. It's one trick pony. It's a hell of a trick, but it's still a one trick pony. So I do think China needs a global world order, but it's going to be interesting to see how President Trump's and his national populist movement evolve, because I think the national populist movement is going to clash with these tech elites. They're going to clash these tech elites that want the best person for their job and don't have a problem with H-1B visas or outsourcing manufacturing to China, or dealing with these the Zionist portion of the group that wants this strong security for Israel, because this national populist movement is going to say they're almost isolationists to a certain degree. So it was a great interview with Steve Bannon just to get that insight and see this way of thinking behind the intellectual side of Trumpism. But what it's going to evolve is going to be so much more interesting, and we'll see where it takes the country. But right now, the reality of it is American system is meant to be slow. One, there has been a lot of economic growth in America. Two, it hasn't gotten down to the everyday American. Facts on facts. Three, there is a rise in China that America has to come to terms with one way or another. And you have this group, this national populist movement. Now they are not going to go away. They are not going to go away. So it's going to be interesting on how these groups interact in the coming days, in the coming weeks, months, years, as well as the impact this is going to have in the midterm elections. Love to hear your thoughts. Comment below if you have any insight. Make sure you like, share, subscribe if you enjoy the content. Until next time, take care. Back to up.